to think like a Christian workplace is just magically better. Like, you know, we wouldn't have the New Testament. I make this joke all the time, but we wouldn't have the New Testament if Christians were just good at getting along like we were supposed to. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the FaithWorks Lancaster Conversations on Calling podcast, as I have joked several times, or haven't yet because we're out of order recording. I gotta remember that. I'm gonna regret the length of decision title we made. Anyway, this week we're diving deep into Eric and I's psyche. That's where we're going. So Eric and I realized in our first episode we didn't give a ton of detail about ourselves beyond some of the musings we did as we talked about the problem of this podcast. So if you started listening to this podcast to dive into faith and work and how it integrates and how work is worship, Eric and I want to talk a little bit in this episode about how we got here, why we care about it, what we've learned over our years of doing this. You know, we're not super seasoned yet, but Eric and I have some stuff I think to contribute, right, Eric? I mean, it's not just we're bringing
I think so.
But
we were and we didn't dwell on this in the first episode. I would like to say because we're so humble, but it may actually be because
it was bad organization. It had nothing to do with humility.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, hopefully it wasn't humility. It was bad organization, along with all the other things we're doing. But we're humble too, because that's what humble people say. We're here to dive deeper into why we care about this, our experience. So if you're listening to this and obviously you care about this topic in some form or fashion, or you're just bored doing the dishes like me sometimes when I listen to certain podcasts, we're hoping.
Wait, you don't have a dishwasher?
No, I have a dishwasher. It's just like emptying the dishwasher, putting the dishes in. It's a whole thing. It takes.
I was gonna say you just got a new house, Josh.
Yeah, no. We did
a dishwasher.
Yeah. And now my washing machine broke. We had to get a new one. But that's a completely. This is not a new house podcast.
You're hand washing clothes and you're listening to a podcast.
If you're listening to a podcast, most likely you care about work and what it matters. You're trying to either find purpose in it or talk about faith, work, and integration. So this episode hopefully connects a little bit to your experience, because Eric and I have a journey that are both different in our lives, but how we got here, right, Eric? I mean, there's a way we got to this podcast. We didn't just wake up one day and decide we care about faith, work, integration, work as worship. There's a journey in both of our lives that got us to this point.
Yes, you would about that. You would not know from how this episode started, or indeed how this podcast has begun, but the podcast has actually been like 10 years in the making.
Yeah. It definitely doesn't feel that way right now. We're not doing great at but yeah, that's where we're at.
All right. So I'm going to start off. We're going to ask each other a few questions here. And again, we're gonna talk a little bit about our own backgrounds, what we're doing now, how faith work connection features in that or doesn't, how we came to care about this, and some of the challenges that we're dealing with as we're wrestling through this. So I'm going to start off with the first question, and for this next few minutes here, Josh is my guest in this. So in our very first episode, we introduced the FaithWorks Lancaster podcast, but as you mentioned at the outset, Josh, we didn't say a whole lot about who we actually are. You may not care, in which case skip for the next few minutes and get to the next question, which you won't want to miss. But for this one, we're just going to talk a little bit about our relationship to this. So Josh, if you could start us out here, walk us through what your professional life looks like right now, and where you find the faith work connection, both alive and maybe not alive in your own day-to-day.
Yeah, no. So this will come out through the podcast in different places, right? But my professional life has looked different over time, whether I was in ministry for a while, on a pastoral staff, and then decided for some reason that I wanted to get into education. If I'm being honest, when I first took the job, I was like, this is a door in the route. But I took a job as
That's what they all say.
Yeah, that's what they all say. I wanted to get into education, so there was a route into this office with this weird guy named Eric Brandt, that had this, like, it's a learning systems administrator job. It was basically you oversaw the LMS and answered questions for faculty, and it was mostly just telling them how to reload pages. No, that's not true. I did a lot of other things.
Maybe you should say that this office too is so we're talking about you coming to work for Lancaster Bible College,
Yes,
and
yes.
working in the Office of Digital Learning, which has to do with basically building, maintaining, supporting
Yeah.
the whole
Supporting
online learning enterprise of the institution.
creating online courses, supporting faculty in that, answering questions, things like that. So I started in the Office of Digital Learning, and I've been there for a while, other than one brief stint into something else that we don't need to mention for now. I've been there for coming up on somewhere around 7 years. So
I think you should mention the brief stint at some point, though.
We call it the gas station sabbatical. I went to work.
There we go.
Yeah, I'll get to that later. There's a lot of context. Okay. So anyway, I started the job, and so I've been there for about 7 years now. And my professional life, it is really a mix of a lot of things. It's a mix of as any job would have, mundane administrative things, whether it's having to look at a lot of tables and figure out data and answering emails, but also really cool stuff like creating course content and creating experiences. We term them learning experiences, for students, and so having to work with faculty members to create those spaces. Now, a lot of my job now is overseeing a team that does that, so I'm not necessarily in the weeds as much anymore, but over the years of being there, I was in the weeds, whether it was answering questions for faculty, helping build trainings, for faculty to teach them how to do their jobs better in the technology that they were using. And that's most of my work. I've been very much on the technology side of that for most of the time, until somebody on this podcast who won't be named decided to go to a different job. So now I'm the interim director in that office right now, so I'm overseeing the whole team.
How dare they?
Yeah, I know.
How dare they put you in such a position?
What a horrible position. So I really like it, and I think how the faith and work connection kind of made its way, and this will come into probably some of how it became personal for me, but the faith and work connection, there's different places that it connects, right? So, like, obviously I work at a faith-based institution, so the courses we're designing, we're looking at how we integrate faith into those courses and things, so the actual content has that integrated in it as well. But that's actually the part I don't think about nearly as much when I talk about this faith work integration side, because I think about the work we're doing is really creating and building experiences for students, and we're creating kind of little, I use the term today, kind of little micro environments for students to learn in. And so this faith work connection really connects for me in this space, because I feel like we're living out some of what our creator does in this microcosm of what we're doing, but both through our relationships with people, but also through the experiences that we're creating that are supposed to be bringing students closer to him, as well as teaching them how to get into whatever profession they're getting into. And so a lot of our work is trying to figure out how to reflect him in the midst of what we're doing. And so really what I think my connection that's been the strongest to that, and I'll come through a lot of this, is I have a phrase that I often lean on, which is bringing order out of the chaos. If I could define anything about the office I work in, it's much like our creator brought order out of the chaos, and continues to do that. We're doing that in our job on a daily basis.
You're a chaos killer.
Yes, chaos killer, so to speak. So that connects into that space. I think the strangely absent part at times is just thinking about as anybody would, like the monotonous administrative things. There's always parts of the job that don't feel like as creator worthy, if you will, in what we're doing. I know they are, because I have this different perspective now than I did years ago of my work, but that's really where it connects into that. And it also connects into how I do leadership, how I lead team members, the systems that I build, all of those things. I see those as ways that I serve God, because I'm cultivating something in the midst of what I'm doing. I'm cultivating relationships, a place that people can feel safe and happy and work and support their families, but also a place that cultivates students and forms them into the people that God wants them to be and use them. So I kind of see that. I don't know if that makes sense, but all of those connections kind of funnel into the day-to-day whether I remember it or not each morning. Though my dashboard on my computer does say "bring order out of the chaos," so it always reminds me of that every day when I connect into it.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're the most fundamental call as
Yes.
you've articulated it. That's great.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Eric? You're a new job in life, so this has looked different
Yeah.
for you probably, even than it has probably most recently, because you were at LBC longer than I was. So your experiences, it's been a new world these couple months for you in a different way, probably. So
right. Yeah. And it's I'm still figuring out. This is a good question because I'm still figuring out what's changed and what's stayed the same. But let me back up in the response. So I've worked in Christian higher ed for 15 years as a professor initially. Yeah, I was kind of on an academic trajectory early on with grad studies, et cetera, and lived the life of the starving adjunct faculty member for a few years. I've worked in, like Josh has mentioned here too, some similar background in terms of work in instructional design, and then as a department director, the Office of Digital Learning that Josh mentioned before was kind of my first leadership opportunity, and then moved on to work as an academic administrator as well, mostly all at Lancaster Bible College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where Josh and I both reside.
yeah,
Hence the emphasis on Lancaster in this podcast.
it'd been funny if we emphasize Lancaster, but we don't live here. Yeah,
that would be
Missouri.
really bizarre. Yeah.
That would be a weird vibe.
If one of us moved away, that would cause a big problem here. Anyway,
we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, we shouldn't do that. Again, mostly at Lancaster Bible College. A little brief stint elsewhere wasn't long enough to be notable, though. And Josh, you've alluded to a recent change that impacted him as well. So Josh and I worked together for many years, as he said here, and then about 4 or 5 months ago, I stepped away from LBC and from that role. And now I work in professional and faculty development at the Association for Biblical Higher Education. Big change for me. And when we talk in a little while about kind of our personal awakening to faith work integration, or the Sunday to Monday gap, or however the many ways we could refer to the topic of this podcast, I was really formed mostly through my work at LBC, and so now I'm working with a much smaller team. I don't have any direct reports, and so I am kind of taking a different angle, a different approach. One of the best ways to learn something is to teach others, and now I'm in a position where I don't have a team to kind of lead in a particular way, and so I'm having to lead myself differently, and I'm having to lead peers that I don't directly oversee, and so it's a very different environment. But Josh, as you mentioned before too, like both of us, for current experience, past experience, your church ministry background too, these are all Christian workplaces, right? And so maybe some of the folks listening to us right now are going to be like, oh great, okay, these guys, they have it easy, right? They work in Christian workplaces. Of course they're doing faith work integration stuff. Not necessarily. A Christian workplace, whether it's a ministry or a business, there are advantages and there are disadvantages to being a Christian in that workplace and thinking meaningfully about what it means to integrate our faith in our work. On the one hand, it's a very open and conducive environment, but then it also comes with the assumption that because we're all followers of Christ in this Christian workplace or ministry context, that the integration must be happening. That is not the case, right? So while we're in an environment that is supportive and there's plenty of opportunity and even this sense of expectancy, and you really have to be intentional about it, right? To actually bring these things together. It'd be very easy to just segment, to live the sacred secular dichotomy, the false dichotomy, and say, oh, well, hey, I'm going to go to a work prayer meeting, but then I'm going to jump over and I'm going to check off some tasks, or I'm going to have a one-on-one meeting or something like that. And the faith work integration, if we're consistently doing it, applies in those cases where we're having a one-on-one meeting, where we are doing some deep work to design a solution for something, doing some strategic planning, having a conversation with a vendor or a potential vendor. It applies there too, but it's not necessarily happening. You have to be intentional about it in any of these cases, whether it's a Christian workplace or not. Again, there is this sense of if you're going to be if you're going to conduct yourself in a Christian workplace with integrity, well, of course you need to be integrating faith and work, and I think that's true. But just because it's true as something that we ought to value doesn't necessarily mean it's actually happening. And so I think again there are certainly advantages in a Christian workplace, and that's been most of my professional experience. But it's not a given that it's happening, and so it actually comes with some of its own additional challenges too, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think before jumping to the next question, I think part of this, because you and I used to see this whenever we'd interview people for positions. It was always like, why do you want to be here? And it was like, well, this is a Christian place. And there was always like assumption in that, like, this will be easier to be a believer here than it is other places. And there are advantages to it for sure. Like the way we can talk and the way we look at our faith is more openly discussed and looked at in the workplaces. But to think like a Christian workplace is just magically better, like, we wouldn't have the New Testament. I make this joke all the time, but we wouldn't have the New Testament if Christians were just good at getting along like we were supposed to. Like, so, like, where it's still difficult in times, and especially I think it comes from, if you view faith work integration as just being able to talk about Jesus at work and being nice, then sure, it's easier. But like, that's not all of what it is. I think as we dive into this podcast, we'll flesh out that I think there's more to it than that. And if that's the case, then it can be just as hard in a Christian place to do this than a non-Christian work environment. Because sometimes we think we're doing it. But there's sometimes CEOs in a Christian organization look the same as CEOs in a non-Christian organization. You know what I mean? Like it's the environment isn't always a given, just because it's a faith-based space. And I can at least say I worked in a non-faith-based place for 4 months. I worked in learning and development at an organization for 4 months. So I experienced it for 4 months. I can say that. I've also, for context on this podcast, I do consulting in a non-Christian environment quite often. So it does look a little bit different for me as well. I do some consulting in the same field that we do in LBC, but just in a different context in a non-Christian environment. But
right, and you can so you have some experience to be able to point to where there's similarity and where there's difference. And I'll just add too that I think we have a lot to learn from committed followers of Christ who are working in non-Christian, pluralistic, diverse workplaces, for the challenges that they're dealing with. Again, for me, I have to look back to almost my pre-professional days for that experience, which I do have, but it's not since I've been a professional, so to speak. And so I'm looking forward to us through this podcast, learning from those folks who are really kind of on the front lines of what it means to do that in those other places. But I think the point we're trying to make here is that this is a shared challenge. It's not all on one side versus the other. And I'd also add, before we jump into the next question, one person who's been really helpful for me in thinking about this connection from a distinctly Christian sort of ministry perspective is actually somebody that I think, Josh, you're going to mention in a moment here too, but Tom Nelson, who is Kansas City pastor and founder of Made to Flourish, which is a great organization for supporting particularly pastors, not exclusively, but particularly pastors who are engaging with their congregants about this. And I found it beneficial, not as a pastor, but as someone who works in Christian ministry of a sort, educational ministry, who has to engage with or is looking to engage with people who are in very different environments. And so I think he and his work and that the organization Made to Flourish is really helpful, particularly those who are coming at this conversation from the ministry side.
Yeah. And that's a great transition, because he writes that many Christians embrace faith on Sunday, but pretty much live as if it's irrelevant on Monday. And most of us spend our years in exactly that place without noticing,
Mhm.
connecting the week to what we've been learning on a Sunday morning. And as somebody who worked in pastoral ministry, and still preaches and still involved in the church, I can absolutely attest to the fact that that's a reality. In many cases, whether you work at a Christian institution or organization or not. And so, what was the experience or realization, Eric, for you that made the Sunday to Monday gap feel like a real problem for you personally, and not just something you read about?
Mhm.
What made this personal for you?
Mm. So as I will reveal through this podcast. Maybe we began this even with the first episode. So I'm not a scholar. I'm not an academic these days. I do some teaching, and I was on that kind of the professorial trajectory at some time. And so I have to start to answer that question by saying it began to become real to me through reading. And then it manifested in other ways too, but it was through reading. And
Yeah,
I was thinking back on this
as
one.
just everything with
Um,
Eric Brandt. In case you're curious, it's
no,
usually like something he read, that spawns something that happened. Sorry, that's like a bad trick.
I will
It's
own
funny.
that. I will own that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's not entirely true, but I will own it.
yeah.
So here's the thing. I was thinking back over my own history with the faith and work considerations, and really, 12 or 13 years ago, this is kind of where it started for me. I was teaching at the time. I was teaching historical theology and church and culture stuff, and I had my wife and I led a really kind of like a small theology reading group for students at Lancaster Bible College. And one year we chose Dorothy Sayers as our sort of patron theologian for that term, and we read a great little book that's a compilation of her essays. The compilation is called Creed or Chaos, and within that is one essay that she wrote called Why Work. Context: she wrote this in the close aftermath of World War II, and um, with the absence of pressure that as a society, Dorothy Sayers and her context in the UK, that they weren't now working directly to support the war effort. So she was engaging this question: well, why do we work now? If we're not working toward supporting our nation towards some existential end, what is the purpose of work? And one of the beautiful things in her essay is that she um, argued that work is not just for economics, right, or for as a means to make money, but as a way to fulfill um, and undertake creative activity that reflects our nature as image bearers and our calling by God to tend creation, to steward creation. And none of those concepts were new to me, but reading that with students who were folks who were younger than I was, figuring out what they're going to do with themselves. Um, in that context, it affected me deeply to think about work as exercising calling as image bearers. And then a few years after that, this is about 10 years ago, I read Tim Challies' book, Do More Better. Yeah, and Josh knows this book well too. A beautiful little book exploring practical productivity habits, even tools to use. And then I was in a position, not at Lancaster Bible College, but elsewhere, where I actually had to build an online course around that book and the concepts in it. So I got really deeply familiar with it and was affected too, because Tim, he brings a very healthy Christian perspective. That we are doing work, and we are called to be productive as servants of God, right? That the ways in which we love God and love our neighbor is largely through how we work. Now, that's work broadly defined. That doesn't mean necessarily work that you're making money for. It could be work in the home, any kind of work in the
Mhm.
church. But the argument is to do it better, right? To do more better. How can we be maximally productive? Which doesn't necessarily always mean just checking off more tasks, but doing better quality work and in some cases more of it to the glory of God. So that was shaping my thinking. And then I was involved in some faith and learning working groups in our academic context, and I began to ask the question more and more: well, what does this mean for staff and for graduates who are not pursuing scholarship? So there's this whole uh, uh, scholarship vein on the relationship between faith and learning, and that got me more interested in faith and work, right? After learning, after formal learning for many folks. And then, as we talked about a little bit earlier, leadership opportunities came along. Suddenly I was responsible for other people's work. I was somewhat responsible for departmental culture. This is when Josh entered the scene with the department that I was leading at the time. We read a book by Matt Perman. I'll let Josh talk about that one. I'll skip over it. And that really began to make this concrete. It's when I began to increasingly realize that this was a problem and that it was fixable. The problem was that I hadn't been giving sufficient attention to the relationship between my daily work, my work just broadly conceived, and God's call on me. Even I would say His mission, Missio Dei, God's mission in the world. And so since then, it's really just been an exploration of practice, improving that through even considerations of management and leadership, biblical theology, back to the mission of God piece, and even kind of the history of work. I'm particularly interested in looking at the Reformation and how this concept of the priesthood of all believers really infused, daily work with a sense of sacred calling. So that's a longer version of this, but through all that is how it became personal. Really started about 13 years ago. Still on the journey. Glad to be on it with Josh now and with our guests and listeners on this podcast.
Yeah.
So Josh, how about you?
Yeah. So it's never been personal. No, I'm just joking. No, I think my journey's just a little bit different, right? It's though similar time periods. I don't know why. We were just different ages of where this happened. I'm not alluding to anything, but Eric is older. It's fine.
I think that's obvious.
I don't know why. Anyway. So yeah, it was probably, I mean, college time frame when I first got as many probably in my age group or not did. I opened an Andy Crouch book for the first time, like culture making. And it started this, for me, faith and work integration and how I thought about it and how I thought about my work being a calling or worship started not necessarily as a work conversation, but more of like a understanding of what we call creation mandate for those listening who might not be as familiar with that terminology. This idea that when God creates us in Genesis, right, He talks about creating us. It's not just like, hey, you're now alive, go garden and have babies. Like God is working towards something that all of that stuff encompasses into. I mean, He definitely wants us to populate the earth at that point. And would continue that with, that's all I'm going to go down that road. But that's a part of it, but there was more to it. We were supposed to cultivate what God gave us in creation, right? And this idea. And so Andy Crouch takes that a step, not necessarily a step farther. Some might argue repeats other stuff that people have already talked about. But Crouch does it in a more modern way at that point. And it talks about this idea of that, this whole like concept really that we've understood as kind of culture war is not about that. The Christians were called to make culture, make things of the earth that God has given us, whether that's structures, government, art, institutions, workplaces, things like that. We're supposed to build these environments, these cultures, in a way that's glorifying to God, and that there's purpose in all of those steps, right? And I think that was where I was first introduced with this idea that like following Christ is more than just like believing in Jesus and being nice. Like I understood the gospel, I understood scripture, I understood all of those things, but actually understanding that like the day-to-day work that we do is all a part of that bigger calling and that plan. And really, we're never really able to really realize the purpose and the calling behind it without Christ first being able to reconcile us to the God who made us in the first place in that direction, right? So Crouch gets me into that realm, but I'm still a college student at that point, so like work is a thing, but like, it's different. And so I get into ministry. And I think Crouch kind of carried me a long way with some others. Like that was where I was first introduced to John Dyer as well from Dallas Theological Seminary. And Dyer is very much on the technology side, which technology has always interested me in ways. And so that was where I really also started.
Wait, what? You're interested in technology, Josh?
I know, it's very surprising.
That's crazy.
No, right? Like, so my office doesn't scream it. I was interested in that. So Dyer really hit a chord for me as well. He was another influential person in my walk on this, because I started to see not just culture, what we're building, but the things we're creating, the systems we're creating. It was where I really think I started to realize I had kind of the systems mindset to how things worked. I liked my systems. I liked how I created things. I like how I built them, things to work. And
yet you were mainly working with youth.
Yes. Well, I created a lot of, I will tote my own horn that I created a lot of systems in that youth ministry that didn't exist before. So that's where I started to see, I was a youth pastor at the time that I got into Dyer, but I started to see it wasn't just the relationships, which is a huge part of it for sure. I'm not underplaying that at all, but it was the way we did our work that started to matter too. Starting to realize that the technology itself could be something that was glorifying to God and actually might make it somewhere in the end, that God's working towards a city at the end of the picture. So Dyer starts to form that picture for me. And then I end up at digital learning, and I start to I went from overseeing volunteers, like 30 to 40 volunteers, preaching every couple weeks in the main church service and preaching every week in the youth ministry, to answering help desk tickets, and getting a lot of comments from Eric on things that I created. No, it was a great.
You put that so diplomatically.
Yeah. So it was a transition for me. I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go, and my purpose that I had seen in my involvement in ministry, which had been most of my life. Like, as I've mentioned in this podcast, probably I think already earlier, and if I haven't, it'll keep coming up. But I had been in more vocational type of ministry all the way through college and into the ministry that I was in at that point. So when I burn out and decided I needed something different, I ended up in this job, and there was easily a solid first year that I was like, what the crap did I do? And my purpose of my work, it was easy for me to talk about all of that stuff with Crouch and Dyer. But now when I'm looking at like Excel sheets that go into a learning management system, I was really being tested on how much I believed that. And that changed some of my understanding. And then what was really influential is what Eric talked about. I'm glad Eric brought it in. He brought in What's Best Next by Matt Perman. And I'd already been kind of trying to think through, because part of the reason I burned out in ministry was I viewed doing a lot as a thing I was supposed to be doing. And I never took time to think through, how am I creating a system for myself to healthily work, and focus on the right things. And I think at the core of Perman's book, there's a lot of stuff that he talks about in there. And if you ever find this podcast, Matt Perman, we tried, come join us. To talk.
The invitation is standing.
The invitation is still standing. Okay. It was very influential for me, because it transformed me from thinking of just like, oh, the things that we do go somewhere and what God's doing, but the actual way that we do our work matters too. And this was coming together for me at a time that I was also getting very interested in project management at the same time. And so that kind of was the aha moment for me, to realize that it was like, it's more than just the stuff I'm making. It's about how I'm doing it in the environment that we're building in the work. And so, yes, it's about the relationships, but it's also about the systems I create to support people or what I'm doing. And so it changed my understanding of all of the work we were doing for coursework, because now it was no longer just we're creating these courses, but we're creating systems and things to put in place that are making something of the world that we're in and are affecting the people around us. And whatever that may look like, changes my understanding. And so, yes, I can do it while loving others, but I can also love others through excellence in what I'm doing. And so that transformed everything for me at that point, and equaled into, because I am a type A personality and systemized, as Eric knows, what I'm infamously known for in our work environment, which, as our department assistant just called me, somewhat like a robot the other day. My personal like Notion productivity management system got completely, like, I completely reshaped how I thought about my work and how I organized things. And it really changed the way I interacted with people, and the way I just manage my own self in what I was doing. And I give a lot of credit to that. And so that's kind of where it's taken me in that space. And there's been other books and different things that have influenced me across those spaces. But I think that thinking of kind of like, that's where the order out of the chaos phrase came from for me. It was like realizing it's not just what we're doing, but it's how we do it. And I think that's why it's so hard to say that Christian organizations do this well all the time too, because I think a lot of times we think about faith work integration as in like what we're doing and how we treat people. But the things that we do and how we do it, beyond just how we treat people, but the way we do it and the process in which we do our work, that matters too, and that makes something out of what we're doing. So
I think that all very, very illuminating, even for me, who knew most of that story. But thanks so much for sharing that. I'll just say that part, emphasizing not just what we do, but how we do it, is perhaps one of the most profound shifts for me as well. And this gets back to kind of how I was responding to an earlier question regarding being a Christian in a Christian workplace, ministry, whatever. That we're in a context that's conducive to thinking clearly and practicing behaving in a way that relates faith and work closely, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's happening. I think in our kind of evangelical Protestant context, maybe particularly in Lancaster County, but I know it's prominent elsewhere too, and particularly within the whole evangelical subculture, is that we can be so pragmatic, that if we're going to consider how faith might relate to work, we think about, well, I just need to make sure I'm doing the right things. Okay, that's like it's the ethical conversation, right? But the ethical conversation is deeper than that as well, and the whole conversation of relating this really to God's mission in the world, everywhere from before the creation to creation, especially of Adam and Eve, and the work they called us to do, as Josh has been talking about here. There's also just this element. I'll clap for a moment here because I completely lost my train of thought. Give me a second. We realize that how we do what we do matters. That was kind of new for me to think about this, that it wasn't just about getting X, Y, and Z done, but particularly as I moved into a management and a leadership role, that how I did it, how I supported and encouraged and empowered others to do things mattered as much as what was actually done itself too. So I think that's great. That's key.
Put it in a very, before we jump to the question, to put it in a very practical context and also axiom. Like, we often hear the phrase, the ends justify the means. At the end of the day, like, some of this faith work integration is realizing that the ends don't always justify the means. The means are important, and the way that we get about that, and to look at the God who created us, that's how he is. It's not the ends justify the means. It's the God had means, and every moment of how he did something was intentional to get something to where we were going. And just thinking of a very practical instance that we've looked at, both Eric and I, and I've learned this from you, Eric, in some ways, and learned this in other places, right? A perfect example, right, is even if you're like leading a person and you're trying to get to this end product of something you're creating, there's two routes you can go when that person doesn't hit what you want it to be. I'm being vague for right now, but like, let's just say they're writing up a report or something. Okay. There's the one way you're leading them. You can go, you know what, I'm just going to redo this part for them because it's not the right way. That would still get you to a good report at the end that you wanted, right? The other way is to say, well, no, I want to help them grow in this space as well. And so I'm not just going to rewrite this for them. I'm going to coach them through how to do this themselves. Both ways of getting there got us to an end product of something that was probably good, but the way we did it mattered. And I think that's what I'm talking about at a practical level. Amen. Is the way we do it, right? And that's a leadership example, but it can go down to either the way you're fixing a car, the way you're driving a truck, the way you're working at a bank. The way you do the thing you're doing matters just as much as the end thing that you do. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's one of the big game changers that really changed my understanding of how I set up myself at work.
Yep, yep, and we're trying to name drop, I think, all kind of our patron saints of faith and work here too. So
Yeah.
just, I mean, I'll mention Dorothy Sayers again. She is huge in that area of the quality of the work, serving the work. Along with that, C.S. Lewis, contemporary of Sayers, writing really, really similarly that as Christians, the first as Christian workers, the first evidence of that should be that we do good work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right, as we look to wrap up here, Josh, let's just look ahead a little bit. Okay, so we've said before at the beginning of with our first episode that this podcast is a listening tour. It's not just a lecture. We're doing that maybe a bit in this episode, but this is not how the podcast is going to unfold. We're going to have guests on, and really the premise is that we want to learn alongside these people that we interview. We want to talk to people local to Lancaster County, local to the region. We want to talk about the people in the kind of the national scene, maybe even international too. Pastors, theologians, business people, nonprofit leaders, etc. So because we don't have all the answers, right? And so what is for you, Josh, something that stands out in your mind right now that you don't know yet about Lancaster County or about Christians in the workplace that we're trying to reach,
Yeah.
that you're bringing into these conversations, right? From your perspective, that really kind of stands as maybe an open question, rather than having a settled conviction about something. What's
Mhm.
something that you are wanting to have answered? Probably also assuming that the answer to that is not simple, and it may be just something we got to converse about a lot, but that you're not settled on.
Yeah. Well, I still like a very personal thing, right? Is like how to balance I'm a very type A personality in all of this. And so the way I end up talking about it, or the things I do in my life, as Eric knows, are very like systemized and structured in many ways, right? And so the way I live this out ends up like looking a certain way. I still haven't like nailed down for myself, right, the balancing of the people side of it and the balancing of the excellence side of it, and like how that all works together in many ways in some places. And also just like what does this look like for different personalities and different ways of working, right? Because our God is such a complex God that just because I do something this way does not mean that's the only right way to do it. And so I've really struggled, I think, at times, like from a leadership perspective, coaching people who don't think the same way I do at how this works for them,
Mhm,
in
mhm.
ways. And that's just been a struggle of myself of trying to figure out what that looks like. And so I'm curious to learn more of how other people are living this out in different contexts, and understand better the struggles that everybody's wrestling with in different contexts, right? I think you and I connect well on this because we have very similar context in many ways, which is that we have theological education. We end up in these spaces, and so like we think about this stuff a different way. And so I'm just curious to learn more about what are some of the actual other hangups that people experience, because mine are very personal to me. And I know there's a lot of different reasons why people struggle with seeing work as worship, seeing it in that space. So I'm curious how other people have either gotten around that hurdle, especially if they think differently than I do, and also just curious to see what are the other hurdles that people are experiencing this, and how do they balance the way of doing something and the people in the midst of that, right? That's still something that Christ as our savior was significantly better at than any of us, obviously. And so I still every day struggle with what that balance looks like, in a way where I feel like I'm constantly having to make decisions between how do I do this thing this way, but also this person needs this thing, and how do I make sure that we're creating this environment that's a healthy workplace, that people are being taken care of, but also that it doesn't become what I call the ministry abuse angle, which is that this is a ministry, so just buck up and get it done type of vibe.
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
Yeah.
kind of, I think, the struggles I've still wrestle with and still haven't necessarily found a perfect answer for.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. That's complex. I think we're going to be sorely disappointed too. I don't think we're going to find the answer, so to
Yeah.
speak, for
Well,
those out there.
clearly not.
But
Yeah.
hearing about
At
how others
least
are
if we can
engaging
not
with it.
find it in enough episodes, so you can all
That's right.
listen, that would be
Yes.
great. If we
There you
find
go.
it in 2
Yes.
episodes, that's gonna really stink,
Yes.
because we were planning
That is
more.
not the plan.
That's not
Anyway,
the
no, I think we're safe there, and good segue to my own response. Really, I think for me, it's at this moment, it's two questions. One is general, and one is specific. The general one is, and this question has been asked by some others in a writing recently. I'll not mention them yet at this point, but. He really asked a good question. The way they asked it stands out to me too. In all this work done from a biblical theological perspective to the faith and work movement and all that, they've asked the question, and we've alluded to this even in the first episode: is there actually a theology of work for the real world out there right now? One that actually works for normal people, right? And this gets to, I said, and their question is there a theology of work? And I want the answer to that question too. And also I want to know, coming out of the principles and practices, like what does it look like for us to actually enact a theology of work for normal people, for the real world, right? And so that's general. The specific one is in Lancaster County, right, where we reside, our home, places a place that we have committed to, where our church communities are. What is the state of the conversation in this area? Josh and I, together independently, we've talked to a lot of people in the area, and we know a lot, even folks beyond that we haven't talked to specifically about this. So I want to know, what is the state of that conversation, of the relationship between faith and work? We've proposed in the first episode what we think is needed in the conversation and what we want to learn, and so that is the question, getting the answer to that. And so I want to know, where are the conversations even happening, and where are they not, and where they are happening, what's being done about it? What does it look like in practice? What is that practical theology of work? What does it look like in action in the region? So those are my questions.
Those are great questions, and I think we'll also be sorely disappointed and not get all of those answered, but we will learn at least what's going on in Lancaster. I think that's the other big. I think you highlighted an important point. Part of this podcast, as you're listening, the goal is to just find out what other people are experiencing, because Eric and I think we have identified something we want to build a community for and what we're doing, but this is also just us figuring out what people are actually struggling through. So again, encouraging you, if you're listening to the podcast, continue doing so. Bear with the early episodes of Eric and I figuring out how the heck we're doing this, because we got some really cool guests coming on that are going to be talking about this from their perspectives. And I'm hoping you feel encouraged through this podcast of what other people are wrestling with and experiencing. And hopefully you take something away that you can take to your work as well, in the context that you're in. Now, I did forget to mention this in the beginning, so I'm just going to mention it here. If you like what you're hearing, or even if you don't and you just want to help us out, that's great too. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast. You can find us both on YouTube and LinkedIn at FaithWorks Lanc. Make sure to do that as well. Anywhere else you're listening, Apple, Google Podcasts, you should be able to find us through that handle as well, because we're still working through that. And then faithworkslanc.org, the website, all of our episodes will have pages there that you can check out with connections to the guests and things that we're having on these episodes. So make sure to connect with us over there.
Yeah, join us on these conversations on calling.